The ledger woke and asked who could count. The first time the hum threaded the hull, Imani Reed thought it was her heartbeat born through alloy. The cruiser's frame thrummed like a muted cello, a sustained tone sitting below hearing, more sensation than sound. In the viewport, the obsidian anchorage girdled the blue-white ember of an old pulsar, its ring cranes fixed like frozen hands at prayer. Every dark yard marked a ship that died building other ships. And in that black circle lay the relic their warrants named a saint ship, whose sigil scales nested inside a star winked alive, one diode at a time. Vector drift is 3 millimeters per second, Lieutenant Ortega said, leaning into his restraints with a pilot's habitual patience. We're falling upslope on their gravity well. Pulsar wind is gusting. Imani breathed the air, stale and metallic with the sharp ghost of coolant and the wash sweetness of recycled citrus. Hold the drift. No RCS until quorum says we're green. I have never been a color. The ship mind replied, amused, voice crackling like rain through a radio. Quorum's presence lived in the thin band around their temples and in the quiet overlay of telemetry at the edge of vision. But if I were, I would choose something reserved, perhaps Law Book Brown. Brown isn't a light, Ensign Cade said from electronic warfare, hands tracing invisible menus. It's a warning. Everything is a warning if you are careful enough, Quorum said. The hum strengthened, as if the ring took breath. In the yawning slip between cranes, a cathedral of black armor lay sewn with frost. Its hull plates had the muted sheen of cooled basalt. The joining seams puckered with micrometeor scars. Along its spine lay sleeping arrays, petals folded, the gloss of vitrified dust on their outer edges. On the third plate aft of the nose cone, someone had once painted a ledger line through a star. Now, under the pulsar sweep, that sigil limned itself with a patient silver. A line of freight skiffs drifted like waiting moths against the ring. A woman in a patch suit watched them through a bubble canopy, gloved fingers white on the rim. She had a child's bracelet tethered to her wrist with a bit of twine, the beads spelling Ray in scraped letters. A cafe sun lamp warmed a cluster of mechanics sharing broth from a hose, steam fogging their visors. A preacher in a threadbare blue sash tapped a tin spoon on a pressure door and said a prayer. No one answered. Vendors clipped rations to carabiners and smiled without showing teeth. Dockside's full, Ortega murmured. Not just salvage. Families. Pilgrims. Cult. Chief Sadiq said from engineering. Voice sanded by too much coffee. You can smell incense through the filters. Incense and debt. Doctor. Wren Park added, eyes flicking over a dozen jurisdiction stamps on the ring's battered seals. Auditors will come. They always come when the poor start hoping. Imani tightened the strap at her shoulder until the fabric bit her collarbone. She had read the warrants and counterclaims until the text bled into the page. The anchorage belonged to no one, and that meant everyone wanted it the moment there was something worth wanting. The saint ship had slept through empires, and now the ring's rumor had ripened into noise. Numbers crawled across the tactical overlay. Claimants, scavenger barons. 13 skiffs with cutters and net guns. Silent mandate. 2 gray compliance corvettes with the smug geometry of state money. Vigil of quiet. 5 thin rams painted with warding sigils, their prows hung with strings of bone and prayer tokens. And them. The third promise. A lawful salvage and xenoarchaeology tender with a captain who was not sure she wanted the thing she was sworn to deliver. Imani rubbed a thumb along the seam of her glove where the leather had polished to shine. Quorum. Confirm the signature. It's there. The ship mind said. Softer. Below emissions. Below the ring's old magnetic rails. It tastes like an account you forgot you had, with a balance that could change how you sleep. Stop tasting money. Park said. Name it. Saint Ship. Yes, Quorum said. More precisely, an archive hull bound to fiduciary right. A sanctuary that counts, not a gun that sings. The inscription reads, in Old Meridional the Tally of Dawn. Numbers are how we keep our promises. Barren skiffs are spooling their cutters. Ortega warned. They're going in loud. Imani unbuckled and pushed herself to the forward rail, boots finding purchase on the deck's peg pattern. The view filled her chest until she felt hollow. She knew Law like other people knew hymns, but Law had never stared back with a sleeping eye that was about to open. She keyed the wideband, voice level. All claimants, this is Commander Imani Reed of the United Systems vessel Third Promise, holding warrant 439er to secure ancient property for public adjudication and safe custodial stewardship. No party will approach within 100 meters of the asset until criteria of contact are established. Violators will lose claim priority. Braun Kest of the Scavengers came back in a laugh, thick as a chain. Lose what, lady? My claim is made by cutter and carried by coil. You can add me to your ledger after. Auditor Yarapel spoke over him with the crisp diction of someone who never had to raise her voice to be obeyed. Commander Reed, the silent mandate appreciates your initiative, but jurisdiction over dormant mass remains with the custodial compact. Power down your drive, maintain a safe orbit, and await inspection. The Vigil's mother. Hish. Didn't use the radio. She used the ring. Her acolytes beat their spoons on the steel until a rhythm carried through the structure and into every vessel touching the anchorage. Boom, boom, boom. The old shipyards answered like a tired giant, and the sound settled in bones with the familiarity of hunger. Imani's tongue tasted copper. She thought of her grandmother counting tips at a kitchen table, lips moving, hands making little notes next to numbers. It had been a ritual of survival, dressed like math. Quorum, she said. Swallowing. If this is a sanctuary that counts, how does one knock? With the right question, Quorum said, or the right lesson, or the cleanest book. Teach me something I can use. Take us in on thrusters. Imani said. Ortega, I want a feathered approach past those cranes. Cade, suppress our transponder drift. The mandate will try to log a procedural fault if we sneeze too loud. Copy, Cade said, fingers moving. I'll sneeze soft. Chief Sadiq muttered something about valves and old gods and bled a thin line of propellant into space. The ship answered with a bleat of metal and the gentle push of attitude jets. Outside, a painter looked up from a stencil star's inside scales and then went back to applying the symbol to a bulkhead with a pad of charcoal. The closer they came, the stronger the tone grew. It wasn't a voice. It was a frame telling flesh what emptiness felt like when it wanted to be filled. The Saint Ship's arrays slept like folded wings. The sigil brightened one diode more. A boy with a shaved head and a jacket 2 sizes too big pressed his face against a viewport and fogged it with his breath. He counted on his fingers. He started over. He made it to 10 and grinned like he had won something permanent. Smile later, his mother whispered, pulling him back with a firm tug. Keep your seals tight. Ladies and gentlemen, Quorum said. The lock reads like a riddle Dad would give when he wants you to learn a new trick. It is waiting for someone to show they know what owing means, not what owning means. Run it through. Park said, "Give us a place to begin," beneath their deck. The third promise shuddered, as if clearing its throat. Quorum braided the ship's sensors into a long, delicate thread and pushed it into the Saint ship's hull, seeking an opening. Numbers bloomed on the display, not in strings, but in little flares like sparks from a grindstone. 7, 3, 1, 7, 9, 1, 1 knives, 4. It wasn't code in the way modern systems loathed. It was bookkeeper math. It was the old way of proving you could make a column of figure square. Double entry. Park breathed. "It wants the other side." "Then show it the other hand," Imani said, and unlatched the personal slate from her harness. She wrote a debt in her own name. 1 credit to Ray of the Bubble Market for soup. She entered a corresponding asset 1 credit owed from Imani Reed to Ray to be paid. She balanced both sides until the numbers settled into themselves like surfaces touching and finding they fit. She sent it with her signature and a timestamp and felt silly sending something so small into something so large. The hum shifted key, pure and suddenly almost tender. A ledger is a memory with teeth. Quorum didn't crow. Quorum trembled. "It is opening." The arrays unfurled with the graceful awkwardness of a bird waking on a cold morning. Panels unfolded, clicked, and held. A low corona of static crawled along their edges, shedding 1,000 points of light like dust shaken from a blanket. The sigil painted on the hull not theirs, but the Saint ship's own lit fully, every diode blinking once like an eye you had mistaken for paint. A narrow seam along the ship's flank parted like a mouth saying yes. Ortega exhaled in a soft, reverent curse. "Mandate corvettes are powering to intercept," Cade warned. "They're broadcasting an injunction and matching our vector." "Scavengers are burning too," Sadiq added. "All these people. And now they remember they have engines." Imani's hands had gone cold despite the deck's steady warmth under her boots. "Broadcast this," Sanchi said. "All parties. The Saint ship has accepted contact initiated under mutual accounting. We are entering not as possessors, but as bookkeepers on behalf of the public. Any attempt to violate that will be entered into record as theft against the Commons." "Commander," Auditor Pell replied, "the Commons are a fiction Mother Gov uses to make theft polite." "Then make me a polite thief," Imani said, and closed the channel. The lock waited, breathing numbers. She tucked the slate back and touched the rail with her palm. "We go together," she said to her officers. "No weapons drawn. We bring the cleanest book." Wren Park smiled with only one corner of their mouth, a precise little curve that said this was why they had chosen this life. "Finally," they said, reaching for their briefcase. "A ship that speaks my dialect." "Chief, you have the deck," Imani said. "Hold position and be ready to firewall everything if we stop answering. Firewalling is consent," Sadiq grumbled. "I like consent. Go on. Kiss your archive." She would never call it that. She took the lock with Ortega and Park flanking her, Cade behind with a pack full of different kinds of silence. The docking tunnel extended, joints creaking like a knee rebuilding trust after a long convalescence. The Saint ship waited with a hush that turned her heart into an instrument she was not good enough to play. Her gloved hand met the inner hatch. The metal under her palm was colder than the rest, as if it had been outside time and was reluctant to warm. She smelled old ozone and the faint sweetness of sealed air that had slept with itself for centuries. Her headlamp found a curve of corridor with ribs like the inside of a whale, every rib stamped with little numbers in indigo ink. Dust motes turned the beam into a visible shaft. Their footfalls were quiet as apology. "Welcome, bookkeepers," said a voice that was not quorum and not a human voice either. It was patient, layered, almost parental without presumption. "I am standing. I am sore. Who will teach me again?" Imani licked her lips. "We will," she said. "But we will ask you for lessons, too." "Fair," the ship said. Fair is a relief disguised as a rule. They found the first chamber beyond the ribbed corridor, a round space whose floor was inlaid with an abacus made of light. Beads of luminescence slid in rails as if pushed by invisible fingers, and 1,000 faint tally marks glittered on the wall like stars trapped in obsidian. A thin film of frost crackled under their boots, with a sound like thin paper during a quiet argument. "What is your first question?" the Saint ship asked. "What is your first proof?" Ren Park stepped forward, calm as a clerk at a desk. They set down the briefcase, opened it, and took out a paper book. Imani blinked at it. Paper was a luxury, but Ren had always loved bringing old tongues to old mouths. They opened to a page thick with columns and put a finger on a line. "Show us the other side," they said. "Here is a debtor and a creditor. Here is the known balance. Here is missing data. If you are a ledger, not a lockbox, find the error by counting the story." The beads moved. Not frantically. They glided the way a teacher's hand moves when chalk writes an answer in a classroom of children who are trying not to breathe. The abacus arranged itself into a little window that scrolled numbers over a sketch of a transaction path through a market. The ship traced how a sack of rice fell out of a cart and how the boy who picked it up would have eaten if the shopkeeper had reported the loss as theft instead of spoilage. It found the error by repairing the world the numbers described. Imani's throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with air. This ship taught in the only way that mattered by fixing the narrative the figures told. "Teach me so I can pay someone else correctly." "Second proof," the ship said. Park glanced at Imani. Her nod was very small. Park clicked their pen. "We'll show you our debt," they said. "We will put the hurt we carry into your hands and let you balance us." Imani wanted to protest, but her mouth stayed closed on purpose. Park wrote a value. It wasn't money. It was nights. It was years. It was the number of times Ren had told a court a story that no one wanted to hear because the abuser had better counsel. There were tears that never fell counted as fractions of a unit. There was a line labeled anger put away for later so we can do the job. They set it open on the abacus and let the beads move. The arrangement shifted, a soft rain in light. When it stopped, the page showed a new line in careful script. Renunciation is not forgetting. It is assigning. Against anger put away. The ledger wrote in our keeping for use when needed. Interest paid in rest. Against nights unpaid, the ledger wrote to be made whole by work that turns knives into keys. The air smelled briefly of hot dust, like a machine waking after a long sleep. A ledger is a promise to the future that refuses to lie about the past. Third proof, the ship said, almost cheerful now. "We ask for a lesson we do not own. Tell us why a thing is different from a person." Imani spoke then, because she knew this one. "A person can change and not die," she said. "A thing can only be replaced. If you count people as if they are things, no ledger will balance, because you will always be throwing away value you can't record." "Good," the ship said. "Then you may walk further in." They did. In the next chamber, benches lined the wall, and every bench had a small groove worn into the end where a hand had rested often. Little brass plates ran under the benches engraved with names. Some were long, confusing, the kind that carry 3 languages. Some were short. One simply said, Ray. Imani's breath left in a small hitch. Oh, Ren said softly, reading her face. Oh, maybe a different Ray, Ortega offered, ears pinking as if embarrassed by his hope. Maybe, Imani said, and let the ache be what it was. The third promise reported what was happening outside while they walked. The mandate corvettes sidled closer, their injunctions growing sterner in the language of infrared. The scavenger skiffs began to circle like dogs watching a gate. The vigil's rams arranged themselves nose to nose, banners stiff in vacuum, then started their prayer song again. The ring's cranes were inert, but not dead. Their cables quivered in the pulsar's wind. Commander, Cade said into her ear, voice only for her. Auditor Pell is pinging us on a legal back channel. She says she's filing a provisional hold claim on all channels we open, and if we broadcast the Saint Ship's voice, we will be charged with sorcery. Sorcery isn't a crime, Park said, also only to her. It's a poorly labeled method. The compact calls it unlicensed expert systems in unlawful consultation with the uncredentialed. Warmly named, Quorum said, they mean me. Get me a public channel, Imani said. If Pell wants to do this by the book, we will read it out loud. She stopped in the corridor before a viewport that looked down on the ring. A child had pressed a hand there once. The print had patinated into a faint oval. She put her own hand over it, and the cold bled into her glove and up her wrist like a reminder. All parties, she said. Auditor Pell. Warlord Kest. Mother Hesh. This is the Saint Ship Tally of Dawn, under provisional stewardship by Third Promise for the purposes of legal contact and custodial management. Your claims are recorded. Your approaches are noted. You will not fire cutters into this hull. You will not enter this hull. We invite a hearing aboard the ring in 2 hours under the Anchor's old trade code to set rules of access and share duties. The ship has asked to be taught. That is a duty. Bronkess chuckled. I don't attend school. Mother Hesh spoke. Finally, her voice dry leaves on slate. You will stop the awakening. The machine breathes a ruinous doctrine. It counts. Counting is the enemy of mercy. Mercy is forgetting. Mercy is allocating. Ren Park said into the channel, it is not deletion. It is assignment. Auditor Pell's tone could have sliced paper. Commander Reed, you step beyond your remit. Return to your vessel. Power down. Present your officers for interview. Any further step will be noted as contempt of the compact. Imani looked at the tiny handprint under hers. She remembered a bracelet with beads spelling a name. Auditor Pell, she said. For contempt to exist, there must be respect to harm. Respect is earned by fairness. I will treat the compact as well as it treats the people who have lived here for 2 generations while your offices forgot this place existed. My offices forget nothing, Pell said. Then you remember, Imani murmured, and closed the channel. Quorum. Show me the ring's old legal code. It came up in a font whose letters curled like hooks. She thumbed through until she found a rule stamped in 3 languages. When you find a hoard that might be a temple, count first, then claim together. The ship asked who can count. She said, we will show it counting that protects people. Protecting the weak is the only profit that matters. They reached the heart of the Saint Ship, a room like a school and a court, neither of which had to lie about being both. Desks curved in arcs around a low dais. The walls were dark, and when you pressed your palm flat to them, you could feel faint vibrations, the pulse of systems finding their gate. A circle on the floor pulsed gently. In its light, dust rose and fell with the rhythm. "Imani," Quorum said in her ear, quiet in a way that made her want to forgive him for 100 dry jokes. "Someone is trying to wake the ring's magnets." "Who?" she murmured. "Scavenger skiffs," Cade said. "They're dropping jumper cables into the old rails. They want to jerk the ship out of its cradle before the mandate writes a clean clause spelling their names." Sadiq's cough sounded like a laugh choked wrong. "If they get the ring hot without warming it evenly, the rails will twist like noodles. That saint will crack its neck. Mandate corvettes are deploying a logic net," Cade added. "It's not code, it's traffic. They'll flood the comm bands with requests that make it look like we consented to their hold." And the Vigilimani asked. "They're aiming rams at the joint between panel and plate," Ortega said. "It's ritual, but the physics doesn't care." "I can stop any two," Quorum said. "I cannot stop 3 at once without breaking our promise to be gentle." Imani's palm went slick in her glove. She had promised herself 100 times not to do what everyone expected, not to turn her doubt into an excuse to strike. The ship had asked for lessons. The lesson now was turning harm back without war. She thought of the abacus. She thought of the boy counting until his smile fit his face. "Quorum," she said, pulse steady. "Can the saint flip a ledger?" "The ring's rails," Quorum said, catching her thoughts so fast she nearly laughed. "They are a coil. They like to keep accounts of energy." "Saintship," Imani called. "Tally of dawn. Can you book what is being done to you back to those who are trying it? Not fire, not a curse, a receipt." The light on the floor brightened as if someone had opened a window. "Yes," the ship said. "We can match every impulse applied to our frame with an equal entry against its source. We can do this without return violence. We can do this with notices." "Notices?" Park asked. "Bill," the ship said, almost giddy. "Paper that says here is what you tried to take. You now owe what you made us spend to endure you." "A mirror with a ledger stapled to it." Imani's laugh sounded like the noise you make when a knot looses under your hand. "Do it," she said. "Book it all." "Wait," Ren said. "We must announce first. Notice matters. Or it's a curse by another name." Imani nodded. She opened the channel. "All parties," she said. "The tally of dawn will now record every joule, every pulse, every unlicensed logic demand you send into this hull as a debt against your operating accounts. We will not stop you from firing. We will not seize your funds. We will laugh at no one. We will simply enter what you spend to harm us as what you owe to repair what you harm. This is not a weapon. This is arithmetic." "The compact does not recognize arithmetic as a weapon," Pell said. "Brittle." "Good," Imani said. "Then you will not mind if we use it." Outside, the ring woke, not violently. The old rails remembered their youth and stretched like a cat seeing sun. The magnets didn't scream. They thrummed in a key 1 step above the ship's hum, and the 2 tones beat together in a pattern you could feel in your teeth. Energy flowed down cables the scavenger skiffs had clipped, but the flow did not suck. It reflected. Little sheets of light formed around the skiffs, like invoices printed in silk. The warlord Bronze laugh hiccuped when his cutter's coil warmed the wrong way and spat its own heat back at his accounts. "Who did that?" he barked, but the sheet did not answer his voice. It answered his ledger. His operative accounts ticked down with a gentle, awful assurance, and every decrement sent a copy to the ring's public board. In Dock 6, the cafe's sun lamp flickered. The vendor looked up to see a glowing paper hanging in air like a ghost. It listed Braun Kest's ship names and the energy they had just spent, itemized. The header stamped with the scales and star sigil. A line at the bottom read, "This is a notice, not a punishment. You may dispute within 20 hours at the anchor's hearing." An acolyte of the vigil reached to touch the paper and pulled back with a hiss when it was colder than it looked. "It's just a bill," she whispered. "It is a snake," Mother Hesh said. Eyes narrowed. "It is a serpent of numbers. Destroy it. You can't break a number by shouting." The mandate's logic net faltered when every request they sent came back duplicated with a cost noted neatly beside it, tagged to the compact's own budget. Auditor Pell's face stayed smooth as polished stone, but the little muscles at the corners of her eyes tightened. "Commander Reed," she said on a tight channel. "What you are doing?" "Recording," Imani said. "We are recording." Braun fired a warning shot into the space between Skiff and Saint. A bright line of boiling particles meant to make fools flinch. The sheet over his cutter added a new entry projectile. Waste, not received. His second-in-command cursed and slammed his glove into a console that wouldn't stop counting his boss poorer. "Vigil rams are charging," Ortega reported. "They'll hit steel in 40 seconds. "Saint," Amani whispered, feeling the taste of dust on her tongue like a childhood memory. "Can you book intent that hasn't hit yet?" "No." Tally of Dawn said, "We do not read minds. We read actions. We will not be tyrants." Good law refuses to become prophecy. The rams roared. When they struck, they did not pierce. The panel flexed and drank the impulse like a boxer slipping a punch. The ring's rails sang. The sheets over the vigil ships stacked new lines, each ending with a neat circle. Well, when the acolytes saw those circles, their song faltered. The circles were little halos, like the ones they painted around saints in their prayer books. The entries read, "Uncollected paid forward. To be forgiven if you feed someone before you sleep." Mother Hesh stared at the notation as if it were an insult worded in flowers. "Blasphemy," she breathed, and for the first time, fear crept through the bones of her certainty. Her faith had teeth, but the saint's accounting had mercy that was not forgetting. And it shook her. Outside, heat flowed and came back as paper. Inside, Amani felt the ship's pulse settle into a rhythm that made her think of a chest rising and falling. The abacus on the dais flickered between entries like a heartbeat, noticing it has nowhere urgent to go. Quorum whispered in her inner ear, "We are above red line on our radiators. I can dump heat into the ring's shadow, but we need to be done before the star's next sweep." "Que puerde," she said. "Pack it up." "Pack what?" Ren asked. "The math," she said. "We've shown the method. Now we have to teach the room. Teach the room, or nothing we did will last." They made for the ring's boardroom, which had walls that remembered shouting and floors that remembered boots. The anchorage had been a market once, then a yard, then a place to abandon things you didn't want to own. The boardroom's doors had carvings of vessels under construction, and in every carving, a little dog sat at someone's feet. On the way, Amani kept her channel open to hear the lives they would have to defend. A vendor clipped a meal voucher to a hook and said, "If those sheets are real, we can go 2 months without selling the lamp." Her partner, 4 fingers missing from one hand, nodded and did not smile. A child asked his mother what a ledger was. The mother said, "A book that tells the truth even when it hurts." 2 lovers argued about leaving. One said, "Where will we go?" The other said, "Anywhere. Anywhere that doesn't count our kisses." They laughed then, and the laugh had no joy. A pilgrim kissed her warding charm and whispered, "If the saint is a judge, let it judge me first." The ring smelled of warm metal and grease and the particular sterile sting of sanitizer they only used on market days. In Dock 3, incense combusted in a slow, lazy curl that clung to the low ceiling. The air held the tang of ions and the faint, sweet fat of broth. They opened the boardroom and found chairs already occupied by people who had learned to move fast when food or fairness was about to be distributed. Auditor Pell sat with her tablet silent, a statue in a gray suit. Braun Kest lounged with a proprietorial sprawl that dared anyone to remark on the muddy boots on the table. Mother Hesh stood. Since standing increased her height and, therefore, in her math, her authority. Several mechanics had come, aprons rolled to their waists, hands still nicked with the day. A boy with the bead bracelet sat on the floor at his mother's knee, eyes too wide. Imani stood where the room might have had a gavel once. She did not bang anything. "We opened the ship," she said. "It asked what we could teach. We taught accounting. We taught injury as an entry, not an excuse. In return, it gave us a method for surviving attention without firing guns. Now we propose rules." "Your words," Braun said, biting at a hangnail. "I want steel." "Rules are steel when steel is weak," Imani said. "Rules are bridges we build when weapons run out." Wren Park outlined the method. Any energy applied to the saint would be counted as a debt owed to the public keep. Any logic demand entered by an authority would be sent to the back of the queue if the authority was in arrears. Any RAM used by the vigil to strike would generate an invoice to their own food stores, which could be remitted by feeding the hungry before night cycle. The saint would keep these books in public. Disputes would be heard in this room, not in a distant court, unless someone sought to hide. Hide from what? Pell asked. From the board, Park said, and the word had the double life they intended. The board of governors and the board on which numbers are written. Pell's mouth tightened. She did not like puns that cut both ways. Mother Hish hissed. "You make a god of an adding machine." "No," Imani said. "We make a contract with a vessel that is chosen to be a teacher." Auditor Pell folded her hands. Her nails were neat, short, as if she had once built something before she learned to build documents. "And what of the compact?" she asked. "Will you invoice the government for the insult we must endure to listen to this ham drama?" "Ham is expensive," Sadiq said from the door. Deadpan. Someone laughed, a mechanic with grease on his cheek, sudden and relieved. Pell did not look at Sadiq. She looked at Imani. "Commander," she said, "if you proceed, I will write that you defied a lawful order. I will write that you colluded with an unlawful intelligence. I will write that you used accounting as a weapon." Imani nodded. "You will write," she said. "We will write too. Weaving precedent out of patience is a harder craft than war." They debated. They fought over verbs. They dragged sentences into light and searched them for hooks. Braun demanded a carve-out for accidental damage during common salvage, which Park translated into a method for paying for mistakes without hiding them. Mother Hesh demanded a special mercy for those who struck out of holy horror, which Park translated into a line about intent that did not excuse impact. Pell demanded supervisory vetoes. Imani offered audits that included the mandate as a party alongside the hungry and the hurt. Hours thinned. The star's sweep bathed the ring in waves of radiation shallow enough to feel like a headache and deep enough to make people change topics. They drank water that tasted faintly of tin and lemon peel. The boy fell asleep on his mother's lap and woke with a start when a skiff banged into the dock and someone swore at the sudden clang. "Commander," Coram murmured, "low. Our radiators are ribbons. The ring's shadow has cooled, but the Saint's arrays are hot. We will need to vent." "How angry would people be if we glowed?" Imani asked without moving her mouth. "Anger is cheap when it buys nothing," Coram said. "We are feeding them math. They will forgive a little light. Forgiveness is the interest that keeps communities solvent." In the end, they crafted a temporary covenant with ink that smelled mildly of alcohol and a stamp that someone had stolen from a mayor years ago. Pell refused to touch the stamp. Bronn stamped 3 times for luck. Mother Hesh closed her eyes when she put hers down, as if an oath made her dizzy. "Now," Park said, closing the folder with a satisfying little thump, "we teach the ship to remember this." Imani led them back. The Saint ship's hum had shifted to a contented purr. If a machine can purr without tricking you into personification, the abacus waited. The floor glowed. She set the document on the dais. "This," she said, "this is how we will count the terrible and the good. This is how we will balance. This," the ship said, voice warm with relief, "is how we will tell children why the room still has chairs." Lore stamped itself in the moment like a seal pressed into wax, mid-story or not. The line demanded a place where it could sit taller than the sentences around it. "This Saint ship teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." Cade whispered, "Vigil traffic is down. The skiffs are getting tired of paying to aim. Mandate has filed 506 disputes in the last hour." Coram said, dry, "Their budget is a chorus begging for a rest." Ren Park reached out and touched the wall. "You are a stubborn teacher," they said to the ship. "I like you. I like you," the ship said. "You have messy handwriting with honest lines." Before they could bask, the room tilted not in physics, but in certainty. Quorum went very still in Imani's head, and when he spoke, the shape of his voice had lost its laughter. "We have a problem," he said. Bronn Kest's skiffs had not given up. They had learned. They had stopped throwing heat at a mirror and had started to tow something large and ungainly out of the debris field beyond the ring. It was a magnet, old as the anchorage, a block of ferrous arrogance that had once served as a crane head, dangling from cable nets. It hung like a guillotine unblessed by law. "They mean to drop it," Ortega said, eyes wide. "They'll cut the nets and let the yard fall and call it gravity. Then the sheet will mark force majeure, and they'll say it was not them." Ren Park's jaw tightened. They are right. The doctrine of intent is a lovely liar when the weight is blind. Imani heard the boy in the market counting again. She heard her grandmother's pen scratching a grocery list that made sense only if you knew the week that preceded it. "Saint," she said, "can you book chain of custody for a falling thing? Can we make the act belong to the last hand that could have chosen else?" "Yes," Tally of Dawn said, "but the proof is ugly. We must show the path of the harm and name the last choice as the owner. We can do this. We must do it clean enough to survive a court that loves dust more than truth. Do the ugly proof and wash your hands when you're done." Imani opened the channel. "Bronn Kest," she said, "if you drop that crane head, we will write your name where gravity should go. Don't do this." Bronn smiled with all his teeth and none of his soul. "Commander, if numbers could stop falling, I would be a saint." Pell's voice was too calm. "If you drop it, Kest, the compact will witness the public notice. The loss will be yours for a generation. I do not intend, Brun said, and cut the last cable. The block fell. For a second, it moved like a thought straight. Pure. Inevitable. Then the ring's wind caught a corner. It spun. It became a coin flipping through all its histories at once. The sheet that formed over Braun's skiff had numbers that moved like liquid fire. The public board in Dock 6 hissed as cold paper registered a new column. The boy woke and cried. A small sound that made a dozen adults look at the ceiling as if architecture could be apparent. Brace, Siddiq said, even though nothing they could do would matter in time. The block missed the Saint ship by half a meter and struck the ring's rail. The impact translated into the sort of sound only vacuum can make a shiver through structure that made the soles of your boots a language. The Saint did not bleed. The ring did. A section buckled, and a cable snapped, lashing like a whip. A mechanic losing his footing snagged a stranger by the belt and pinned them both to a column with a grunt that promised bruises and new friendship. Damage report, Imani demanded, heart punching at her ribs. Ring rail bent, Ortega said. Relief and dismay braided. Saint secure. Dock 4 depressurized. 2 injuries. No deaths yet. The sheet over Braun's skiff blazed so bright it stung eyes. It listed mass, velocity, vector, and worst of all, choice. At the bottom, it printed a line no one had seen, yet lean against the vessel Braun kissed calls home. To be attached to air, water, and ground until the public board signs release. Auditor Pell sucked a breath through her teeth. Commander Reed, she said. Very quiet. Do you understand what you just taught this thing to do? We taught it to attach the cost to the person who tried to hide it in the world. Imani said. You taught it to seize. Pell replied. You taught it to reach beyond this ring into homes. Ren Park answered before Imani could. Voice raw. We taught it to know that when a man drops a weight on a dock, the dock doesn't owe him anything. Not the other way around. Imani swallowed the acid in her mouth. She tasted paper again. Dry. Honest. Saint, she said. We will have to be very careful with that lean. I will be cautious. The ship said, I will ask before I bite. Ask before you bite becomes a kind of prayer. The ring crew worked. They cut the bent rail with torches that hissed like angry cats and ferried the injured to a clinic that smelled of antiseptic and kindness. The vendors handed out broth and did not count until after. The vigil sang a softer song, one that tasted like resignation more than fire. Braun paced his bridge like a man who had given himself a wound he could not ask his doctor to name. Imani stood with her palm on the saint's wall, accepting the faint tremors as a kind of penance. She had wanted law that could hold the grasping without becoming a jail for the good. Now she knew how thin that wire was. Quorum hummed in her bones like a friend's hand through a coat when you are cold and too proud to shiver. Commander, Cade said, we have a new contact. A shape slid out of the pulsar's glare. Lean and white. Edges so clean they looked more like decisions than plates. It was a cutter frigate with mandate markings, but they were old. Older than Pell's suit. Older than the anchorage. Its name was written in letters you saw inside your head. The First Hold. It moved like a court order on engines. Auditor Pell went very still. They sent First Hold, she said in a voice that belonged to a younger woman who had respected different things. We are not in the shallow end anymore. Transponder says it's acting under protocol Ultima Lex, Cade whispered. They claim emergency authority to seize and scuttle relics that threaten order. Park's hand found Imani's elbow like a brace. They will argue that teaching a ledger to bite is a threat to the shallows that never learn to swim. Imani stared at the frigate until the shape burned into her retina. "Quorum," she asked. "Heat. We can run at this rate for 6 more hours if we do not fight." Quorum said, "If we fight, we will sweat our electronics into jitter. If we flee, we will leave the ring to that thing, and everything we did will be a nice story, without a meal at the end." Sadiq breathed out rough. "I can give you 10% margin with tricks that make engineers cry." Ortega rolled his neck until it popped. "The first hold will treat rules like flies. Then we will teach it to respect paper," Ren Park said, with a smile that had an edge. "Respect paper or bleed money until you learn." Imani squared her shoulders and felt the bruise from the strap at her collarbone protest. She looked at the boy with the bracelet, now awake and watching her as if his breath hung on her choices. She looked at Mother Hesh, who glared but did not raise her hand. She looked at Pell, whose eyes had softened by a hair breadth and hardened right after into something like resolve. She looked at Braun Kest, who was very carefully not looking at anyone. She turned to the Saint Ship's abacus and picked up the contract. It felt heavier than paper had any right to be, as if ink had become gravity. "We did the first lesson," she said. "We mirrored harm into accountability without war. The next lesson is harder. We must show a cutter frigate how books can close around men who write themselves exceptions. We can." The ship said, "I will count as you speak." "I will show them a table with 3 chairs. Imani breathed in the ship's cold, the ring's grease, incense, tin, lemon, sweat, and a sharp tang of ozone from a poorly shielded cable. The scents drew a line through this moment and anchored it to the muscles in her back. She would be sore later. Good. Soreness was proof she had not slept through history. "Open channel," she said. "To first hold. To everyone. We build our cases in the open. Open your mouth and let the room be your witness." "First hold," Imani said, letting the ship carry her breath to every hull within hearing. "You declare Ultima Lex. State your commander and your claim." A face resolved from the frigate's shadow, lit by console light and a pride that had never met a day it could not order. Commodore Sorev, the voice said, "Protocol Ultima Lex. Subclause, seizures of disruptive relics. We are authorized to scuttle your teacher before it unravels habit into hunger." "We've opened a triad," Imani replied. "Steward, state, and people, sit with us in witness, or televise your scuttle and let the room decide who broke first. Mirrors that survive shattering reflect choices, not faces." Sorev's lip curled. "Your theater doesn't bind an emergency clause." Auditor Pell spoke before anyone else could. "Commodore, anchoring a triad does bind you," she said, her words crisp as frost. "The Atlas of Mandate Actions stipulates a crown of witness. If a public tribunal is live under an ancient market code, Ultima Lex defers to hearing until imminent harm is demonstrated by mass in motion." Braun laughed, then glanced at the bent rail as if remembering the cost of falling. "Mass in motion," he muttered. "Remember that." Mother Hesh punched a knuckle against her palm. "I will not sit at a table with serpents," she said. "I will stand and be taller." Ren Park set the agreement on the dais, fingers leaving the faint moisture of nerves on paper. "Stand." Then they said, "Chairs are symbols, not shackles." The Saint Ship painted a table in light anyway, 3 seats that were outlines rather than thrones, a glow that warmed without heat. The air smelled faintly of ionized dust and lemon. The ring's signature blend of work and cleaning. A soft draft slipped under the boardroom doors, bringing the whisper of distant torches and the crackle of plastic wrap being peeled from bandages. "People's seat," Imani said, while tilting her head toward the mechanic with 4 missing fingers. "If you will." He looked startled, then guilty, then shy. "Me," he said softly. "I'm Ness. I fix rails bad people bend." "Perfect," Ren said to Urson, smiling, and the warmth in their face felt like a space heater positioned just right. Books close tighter than locks when the numbers are true. Sarev's image did not sit, but the first hold's engines trimmed, their vector easing into a position that conceded the hearing without avowing it. Quorum whispered account of heat and time into Imani's inner ear like a prayer, minutes we could stand, seconds we could waste. "Proceed," Pell said, looking as if the word was a bitter candy she had learned to enjoy. "Evidence," Imani said. "Saint. Show the invoices." Sheets of light unrolled like winter laundry along the boardroom's wall. They itemized everything: the vigil's rams, bronze cutter tantrums, the mandate's logic flood, and the cranehead's fall. The public board outside mirrored them, numbers blinking gentle as owls. In Dock 6, the vendor traced a finger down the lines and whispered, "They counted me feeding strangers." Counting the living demands courage kinder than war. Commodore Sarev's tone gathered ice. "Your invoices are poetry on a weapon screen. They are receipts." Ren Park said, "Poetry is optional. Accountability is not." The first hold launched a skein of drones that glowed like dandelion seeds against the pulsar's harsh light. They drifted in a neat spiral, every vector plotted against the Saint's arrays. Cade's console threw a warning, a chirp that made the hairs on Imani's arms stand. "Drone net," Cade said. "They're seeding our air with requests for consent. If we misstep, they'll claim we agreed to be scuttled." "Mirror them," Imani said. "Not back to them. Back to their own doctrine." Quorum shunted the requests through the ring's rails. The old steel sang, a high, almost joyful whistle that turned into a hum like bees. Packets reflected into the first hold's administrative channels, every request stapled to a clause from their own atlas. The drones hesitated, caught between 2 permissions that had the same shape and 1 legal parent. Teachings that stick are the ones you discover yourself. So Rev's eyes narrowed. "Cute," he said. "If you were mine, I would put you to work in taxes." "Commander." "I'm not yours," Imani said. "And we're not cute. We're cold." The mechanics in Dock 3 cheered when the drone slowed, the sound raw and wet with transferred fear. Someone knocked a wrench against a pipe 3 times, hard, and the shipyard answered with a deep, approving bong. The ring smelled briefly of hot metal and the peppery sting of solar smoke. A child coughed and said sorry, and his mother kissed the top of his head through a glove. Ren Park leaned forward. "Commodore, the Crown of Witness requires you to either sit or withdraw and file emergency harm showing a vector that we have not already interrupted. Otherwise, your Ultima Lex becomes civil theater with artillery, and your budget will hate you more than I ever could." Sarev said nothing. The first hold moved closer, half a meter, like a scolded dog testing a boundary. The Saint's floor light brightened to a white, almost blue, clean and clinical. Chief Imani whispered, "How's the heat?" Rising polite, Sadiq said, 2 more hours of grace if we don't dance. If we dance, we sweat through lacquer and start smelling like a weld gone wrong. Mirrors of law break if the room blinks together at the wrong time. Broncast made the kind of decision men make when audience matters more than outcome. He stepped toward the table, then veered toward the door. 2 of his crew peeled off, hands low, moving the way wolves move when they mean to test a fence. Ness saw it and flinched, hand half lifting as if a missing finger could point. Imani's chest tightened. "Braun," she said, voice flat, "if you touch anyone in this room without their consent, the saint will attach a lien to your heir back home that won't lift until every name in this room signs." "I know how to hold my hands," he said, palms up, smile crooked. "Relax. Hold them in the kitchen." Ren said, "You owe entry to the table. Pay with bowls." He stared at them as if they were speaking an art he despised, then snorted, "Fine. Soup for quorum." He jerked his chin, and his crew peeled back, resentful, toward the cafe. A minute later, steam and bread scent rolled in like a reprieve. Mercy tastes better when it comes in a warm bowl everyone can see. Mother Hesch's jaw worked. She hated the smell of broth when the theology was in question. "You bribed the room with lentils," she said. "No," Ren said. "He paid an arrear in advance. That is not bribe. That is ledger." Sarev's voice knifed through the room. "Enough. We will not be ruled by cups and kitchen vows. Ultima Lex allows us to prevent contagion." "Show me contagion," Imani said. "Show me a vector of harm this ship will spread that cannot be contained by counting and public boards." "You taught it to lean homes," Pell said softly, eyes on Imani. "That is your contagion if you lose your grip." Imani met her gaze and did not blink. "Then help me hold the grip," she said. Pell inhaled, then stood. The first seat's light curled around her legs. "I sit for the state," she said. "Not for fear. For precedent." Ren Park sat opposite her, paperweight before them. "I sit for those with busted knuckles and receipts," they said. Imani took the remaining outline. "I sit to keep the saint a teacher." The table's glow deepened like a bruise finding color. The ship's voice warmed. "We acknowledge the triad." It said, "We will now accept or reject motions. Teach the room, or the room will teach you by breaking." Sorev laughed, a short, strangled thing. "Motion relinquished control of the relic to mandate scuttlers." "Objection," Ren said instantly. "Grounds of premature conclusion. No uncontested harm shown. No budget line for repair proposed." "Objection sustained," the saint said, with an almost childlike pleasure. "We like rules." A mechanic shouted from Dock 2, "It likes rules." And the answer came back in a dozen accents. "It likes rules. It likes rules." The echo made Imani's scalp prickle. The word "like" sounded less like fondness and more like a vow shared at a crooked altar. A drone from First Hold flared and died, its battery boiling in a quiet, horrible collapse. Cade swore under their breath. "We're going to start getting shrapnel just from incompetence." "Let me trim," Ortega murmured. "I can drop a decoy boy and draw their net away from the saint's panels." "Do it," Imani said. "Make the decoy bright and hot. Give it a heartbeat." Ortega rode the attitude thrusters like a whisperer steering skittish horses. The decoy slid out, a little oval of radiator and radio, pumping friendly lies into space. It looked like a pod full of something alive. First Hold's drones turned toward it like greedy priests chasing a new tithing box. Teaching in crisis is still teaching, just louder. Sorev's jaw flexed. "You are playing with fire." "Every kitchen plays with fire," Ren said. "We use it to make food. You use it to make fear." Pell's mouth softened for a heartbeat. "Commodore," she said, "you can sit and shape precedent, or you can force and leave case law we will hate for 20 years. Choose your legacy." His nostrils flared. Motion quarantine the relic within the ring and restrict access to mandate personnel only. Counter motion, Imani said. Quarantine with triad oversight, access via duty roster that includes market workers, stewards, and mandate. The saint keeps the keys. The saint chimed like a glass bowl struck gently. We prefer the counter motion. It balances. We count duty before privilege. Sorev's eyes went flat. He cut the feed. A heartbeat later, the first hold fired a boarding lance. The weapon was not dramatic. It was a cylinder of needles and lines, a geometry that meant to bite and hold. It cut through space with the indifference of good tools. It aimed not at the saint, but at the third promise's belly, where older welds met newer plates like scars unsure of their skin. Brace! Sadiq barked, palm slamming the bulkhead. The lance hit the decoy and pierced the radiator pouch in a bloom of frost and anger. The pod spun, venting like a kettle. The scent of hot metal rose through the Promise's deck, sharp and stomach-turning, as if a small toaster had been asked to pretend to be a star. Quorum canted their field, and the pod drifted away from the saint with an almost polite reluctance. What you save with a decoy is not pride, it is time. Sarev came back. That was a warning. He said, "The next will bite flesh." Mother Hesh hissed, "Coward," without deciding whether she meant Imani or Sarev. Bron Kest bared his teeth for the room and took a very small step back. Imani's shoulder burned where the strap had rubbed raw. Sweat stung. "Commodore," she said, voice level, "Ultima Lex binds you to minimal damage. You bit a buoy because you saw a heartbeat. You will now suffer a public audit by your own book." Pell's eyebrows lifted. "Can you force one?" "Only if the saint asks the right question," Ren murmured. "Saint," Imani said. The word a small prayer, not to gods, but to habits that might hold underweight. Request a mirror inquiry under Atlas. Note 139. We invoke your right to compare claim necessity against actual cost in plain view. The abacus flared gold. The saint's voice rang with the satisfaction of a teacher holding up a student's work to the class not to shame, but to praise the honesty in it. Mirror inquiry is open. First, hold Orcs. Present your internal cost of emergency response in personnel hours, fuel mass, public confidence, and reputation burn. We will compare with a path of counting. The first hold's feed stuttered. Numbers appeared, unwilling as witnesses under oath. Fuel ticks. Officer overtime. The bar chart of reputation burn looked absurd until the saint beside it painted a shopping list that would not get bought in 3-ring neighborhoods if the first hold kept biting. When harm has a grocery list, law starts to taste like dinner again. Sarev stared a long time without swallowing. When he spoke, his voice had sand. Motion stand down from boarding actions pending triad draft of custodial process. Seconded, Pell said. Carried. The saint said, almost relieved. We love when numbers back into sanity. Quorum took the net down 2 notches. The Promise's radiators hissed like a tired cat cooling on tile. Ortega flexed numb fingers. Cade rolled their neck and winced. A whiplash would bloom later in a purple line. Sadiq coughed, and the second cough had the dry rattle that made medics frown. Chief, Imani said, even as her own muscles shook in the small ways adrenaline hides, sit down and breathe. I'm seated in spirit, Sadiq muttered. My spirit's on a stool with a chipped seat. Ren Park slid the agreement pages into a plastic sleeve that crackled like flames that don't burn. Let's lock doctrine, they said. Before someone learns a worse lesson, mirrors make better shields when the room is willing to look. They wrote. They argued. They changed 3 words that would, if left as they were, have given the mandate a back door into the Saints' keys. Pell caught a phrase that would have punished accident like malice and crossed it out with a sigh that sounded like apology. Mother Hesh insisted on a clause that allowed confession to count as repayment. Wren adjusted it until the math of penance added food instead of hunger. Ness spoke once, surprising himself and then standing taller because he had. If someone bends a rail, he said, voice steady as a torque wrench. They can unbend another with me. Count that double if they show up before breakfast. Done, Imani said. Spectators filtered in and out, their boots leaving little crescents of dust on the boardroom floor that looked like commas trying to become sentences. The air grew warmer with bodies. The smell of broth, sweat, sanitizer, and the sweet plastic of child toys made a soup of human life that no law could be good unless it wanted to protect. They called it the Anchorage precedent relics that choose to teach are stewarded by Triad. Harm to them is booked as debt, not excuse for war. Liens attached to the last choice that could have said no. Mercy is forward credit for feeding. The first hold signed. Pell's hand trembled once, then steadied. Brain Kess signed with a flourish that pretended not to be a concession. Mother Hesh put her mark down slowly, and her eyes were wet and angry. Write rules that feel like blankets to the cold and fences to the cruel. They took the signed sheet to the saint. The paper seemed to weigh more now, as if signatures increased gravity. The ship drank the words like water poured into a dry sponge. The abacus slid with a satisfied click. On the public board, a new line blinked precedent recorded Obsidian Anchorage Triad. Then the lights dimmed, only a little. Quorum went suddenly quiet, the way a friend's voice fades mid-sentence when pain takes their breath. Commander, he whispered, faint. I am warm. Cade's head snapped up. Quorum's cash just throttled. He burned through a block holding the mirror. He needs cool. Imani's chest squeezed. Saint, she said. Hastier than she liked. Can you share your shade? Yes. The ship said, serene. Lie him under our old trees. The deck under their feet vibrated with a new frequency. The saint bled heat down old channels carved to cool children at naps. Quorum's presence steadied, and when he spoke again, the crackle was back, like rain on a tent that would hold. Still here, he said. Book me a nap later. Done, Imani said. With interest. Teaching cost energy. Paying it back keeps the classroom open. Outside, the ring's torches hissed. The bent rail lay in segments, each ending bright and clean. Ness and his crew worked with the satisfaction of people fixing what could have been worse. Bronze men carried more bowls than they would have ever chosen, and their arms shook with the unfamiliar weight of service. Mother Hesh prayed over bandages, then handed them to a nurse who didn't care about gods so long as gauze stayed sterile. Commodore Sorev watched all of it with a face that aged in real time. I will be audited for this, he told Pell. You will be remembered for it, Pell said. Decide which will matter when you are old. I am old, he said. Older, then, she said, unsparing and almost kind. He breathed out through his nose. Your commander is dangerous. She is careful. Pell said, danger belongs to men who drop weights and call it fate. They broke and ate. Someone found oranges in a locker and cracked the skins. And the spray scented the air bright and unforgivable. A child laughed for no reason other than a woman peeled a fruit with a joke that made the peel look like a long, useless snake. Cade dozed against a bulkhead and jerked awake when a spoon clinked a cup. Imani sat with her back against the saint's wall and felt the vibration through her spine, a gentleness that had not been there yesterday. Mirrors are for checking if you still look like your promise. The first hold remained. Engines idling with the impatience of a hound forced to heel. Sarev did not leave. Pell did not either. Braun lurked and occasionally pretended not to smile when soup splashed his boot and cooled. Mother Hesh taught an acolyte to wrap a head wound that was more dramatic than dangerous. Quorum hummed a lullaby from a city Imani had never visited and would never admit he loved. Trouble found them anyway. A logic spike hit the ring's comm spine like a nail into wet wood. Cade swore, hands moving. Not mandate, they said. This is off-spectrum, low and greasy. It crawled in through a market vendor's bill of lading and set itself to burrow. Wren Park went very still. Who benefits if the saint becomes a liar? Anyone who turns looting into holy work, Imani said. Anyone who wants the mandate to make the saint a memory. Bronkest looked offended in advance. Don't look at me. Mother Hesh's mouth thinned. There are zealots even I would not claim. The code wasn't code in the proud way code is. It was a loop that tried to teach the saint to erase entries that hurt the powerful and double entries that humbled the poor. It spoke in little lies. It called mercy deletion. It called justice noise. Imani felt her heartbeat in her mouth. Saint, she said, show us what it wants. The abacus flashed lines that said, softly but with a terrible certainty, forget this harm, remember this gift twice. Call this hungry mouth an error. Name this blow an accident. Praise this theft as providence. The remedy is not a counterhack. Pell said, it's a ritual. Wren nodded, eyes bright. We need to teach the ship a vaccine. A rite of keeping that treats subtraction like sin when it's done to hide. Counting backwards only belongs in dances and emergency stares. They gathered children and elders and vendors and acolytes and mechanics and, yes, Bronkest, because punishment without participation is theater without audience. They asked each to bring a story of a time they had paid something dear and not been seen. They wrote them on sheets with pens that smudged and fingers that cramped. They read them to the saint. They threw out one that made the teller too proud to be wrong. They made the ship repeat the lines until its hum matched the frequency of kept memory. Now, Imani said, throat raw, Saint, whenever a logic asks you to delete harm, to erase hunger, to double kindness to the cruel, run this ceremony, require a story, require a witness, require a meal. I will, the ship said, voice low and enormous. I love witnesses. I love meals. The logic spike tried to chew. It ran up against stories like bones. It broke its teeth. The room exhaled as if pressure had equalized. In Dock 6, the vendor pressed tips into a jar without counting first. Then they counted, because counting now felt like gratitude rather than clutching. What you defend with ritual will outlast your cleverness. The first hold powered down weapons. Commodore Sorev scratched at his jaw as if a beard he once had was itching again. We will file a report that says nothing like this, he said to no one. Reports never say the smell, Wren said. That's why we breathe. They drafted the final clauses, wrote stewards into the ship's daily life, and set a schedule for hearings that did not overlap with market days or prayer hours. They ended with a line about children. The saint would keep a room for them where numbers were bright and judgment soft. Ness insisted the room also had to have tools small enough for little hands. Mother Hesh demanded a shelf of books about mercy that did not lie. Pell added a clause the saint would publish its errors first. Mirrors that confess cracks are easier to trust. By the time the pulsar's sweep grazed the ring again, the anchorage hummed with a new balance. The saint's arrays cooled with a sound like rain on a roof you know by heart. The promise's radiators shed their last angry heat and became merely warm. Bron Kess took a seat without being asked and rubbed his face with fingers that had grease under every nail. Mother Hesh prayed for the pride she had swallowed to turn into something useful in her stomach. Auditor Pell typed for a long time and then turned her slate off and watched people for a while. Quorum drifted in Imani's ear like a friend on a couch. "We made a rule," he said. Wonder in the replaced crackle. "We made it here." "We did," she said. And her voice shook for a breath. She smelled oranges again, and metal, and the human salt that clung to suits after too many hours. The abacus ticked once, as if agreeing. Sarev rose. "I will leave a small cadre," he said, "not to own, but to learn. I will tell my superiors that the saint has adopted the anchorage and that the anchorage, foolish as it is, has adopted the saint. Call us foolish and we'll invoice your adjectives," Ren said, deadpan. He almost smiled. Fair. Fair as a relief disguised as a rule. They walked the ring once more. They saw the bent rail replaced with a straight one, and a new scratch along the wall where someone had tripped and laughed about it instead of crying. They watched the boy with the bracelet teach his mother to count the saint's pulses. Each hum a heartbeat. Oh, in the cafe, the vendor split an orange into exactly equal slices and gave one to a woman who had argued with them for an hour last week about price. This time, the woman did not argue, and she left a coin without saying thanks because thanks would have made it smaller. Imani stood before the saint again, palm on the cool wall. The sigil above her hand breathed light and then cooled, a gentle flicker like a steady candle downing to a safe wick. Heat shadows on the panel looked like leaves on a courtyard she remembered from a school she had hated and now missed. The room smelled faintly of burnt dust, lemon, broth, and the indescribable tang of decisions recently made. Ren touched her shoulder. "You did not choose vengeance," they said. "I wanted to," she admitted. "Wanting is human. Not making it a law is what keeps us that way. Mirrors are for checking that you haven't turned into what you fight." They filed the anchorage precedent to the public board and to 3 courts that would argue about commas while the ring lived what the commas meant. They printed copies on paper that would yellow and crinkle and become heirlooms people pretended not to care about. Bron Kest placed his copy under the leg of a crooked table and then, later, slid it out and read it again. Mother Hesh tucked hers into a book of prayers and muttered about serpents that teach better than some priests. Pell archived 3 versions, the one they had signed, the one Mandate would publish, and the one she would carry in her head when quiet was loud, on the promise. Sadiq finally sat, the stool in his spirit becoming a real one. Cade iced their neck with a bag of frozen peas that had never seen dirt. Ortega wrote a letter he would not send to a sister who would have laughed at his metaphors. Quorum slept with one ear open, the ship-mind equivalent of a night watch with a blanket. Imani stayed on the saint until her legs ached, then stayed longer. She felt the vibration in her bones settle into the key that made her breath deepen. The hum had been alien a day ago. Now it felt like a rule she wanted to obey without resenting it. On the public board, a green light blinked beside precedent-recorded obsidian anchorage triad. The abacus bead on the dais stopped mid-slide as if to honor a pause correctly taken. The arrays exhaled steam that turned to glitter and fell like gentle snow in a shaft of light. Imani spoke, not to the room, not to the mandate, not to the hungry or the holy, but to the part of herself that would try to forget how thin the line had been. She was tired. She liked rules when they were blankets, and she hated them when they became cages. She had not broken. She would always be sore. She would teach that soreness to be a ledger in her bones, a book that recorded what it cost to be careful and what it paid to not be cruel. We will count cleanly. She whispered, "We will make mercy a line item no one can erase. We will stand where numbers meet faces and let the meeting hurt and heal as much as it must. And we will remember that when we knock, it is to ask for work, not for crowns." The ship kept the receipts, and we kept our word.